Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da. You were saying?
Welcome to episode 143 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. As always, I am joined by Darren, the most amazing Civil War nerd I know, and I am just Mary. And I don't know why he allows me to do these intros every other episode, but he does. I can never think of anything clever to say. I guess I'm like kind of washed out like the Rebs were after the Battle of Roanoke Island.
Yeah, there you go. That was a train wreck and a half. I'm glad I waited for that one all day. But hey, congratulations on another fantastic intro. Mary, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, living the dream. It's recording night again. Feels like the weather's getting a little bit warmer. I can see my lawn again, so that's good stuff. It's good stuff, absolutely.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
The snow is starting to melt here in Gettysburg finally. We've had some really cool podcasts lately. Last episode, we were joined by Dr. Bennett Parton to talk about his newly released book, just came out last Tuesday, called Somewhere Toward Freedom, which is about the emancipation that took place on Sherman's March to the Sea. Mm-hmm. And then a couple episodes prior to that, we were joined by Dr. Robert Colby to talk about his book on holy traffic. So we've had a few great guests lately. We've also done one episode, just you and I, and now we're back here again, just you and I.
Now you're back with just stuck with me again. No more doctor this, doctor that. Now it's just good old Darren. So it's good stuff, Mary. Good stuff. As I sit here and wait for that question you're going to answer.
What are you drinking?
Oh, thank you. I thought you were going to forget. I'm drinking from Appalachian Brewing. It's called Hoppy Trails IPA, which is right around the corner. And, I'll ask you the same question, even though I know what the answer is going to be, Mary. What are you drinking tonight?
I'm also drinking Hoppy Trails IPA, and I'm drinking it out of my Chamberlain mug tonight.
Oh, that's right.
Even though Chamberlain has nothing to do with the episode that we're going to talk about. It was the mug that you grabbed for me out of the cupboard.
It was. I drank my Iron Brigade mug, Mary, even though they have nothing to do with this either. So, hey, any port in a storm, no pun intended. So, Mary.
Wow, that's going to segue into our next episode, which is something. It is a battle that does not get talked about nearly enough. I realized that since doing the research about it. I think when you study this battle, I think you realize like how important it plays into the Union war efforts, especially not just earlier in the war, but eventually at the end as well.
Well, it does, Mary. There's an old saying that says good things come in small packages. I don't mean you. But when it comes to the subject that we're going to talk about, it is certainly true, though. Despite that strategic importance of the coast and those waterways in eastern North Carolina, to both the Union and the Rebs, the region continues to go very understudied for whatever reason. And again, though it's overshadowed by other events happening elsewhere, it's easy to make a case that the Union's expedition to seize and control that great island sea of the Sounds of North Carolina is amongst the most important efforts in the early part of the war. And it is what it is, but I think to understand the importance is to understand the terrain, right? And we talk all terrain, communications, and weather. And this is going to have all three of them, but especially the terrain. And it's important to understand the strategic importance of the area. Now, the area we're going to talk about is just south of the Virginia border and less than 200 miles from Richmond. Remember that song, that skeleton song from back in the day, Mary? The hip bone connects to the backbone.
Yep.
Backbone connect. That one?
Yep. I was wondering for a second what you were talking about. I thought maybe
Thompson,
spooky, scary skeletons.
Mrs. Thompson from first grade would be so thrilled to remember that song. But in any case, it's kind of a good description of the rivers and sounds along the North Carolina coastline. The area is full of waterways that flow into North Carolina that create a network that lead into the rest of the state and also into Virginia, right? So just real quick geography lesson for you. Pamlico Sound gives full access to the towns of, say, New Bern, North Carolina, which connects the Nyus River and the towns of, like, Beaufort, North Carolina. Now, the river that feeds the Sounds also lead to that limited but hugely important Confederate Railroad network that goes from Richmond to Savannah and from Charleston to places like Corinth and Memphis and places like that. For these reasons, the canal connections are critical to the survival of the Confederacy in the East. Also, that area is a huge agricultural hub. 80%, Mary, of the food for the state comes from eastern North Carolina. A third of the state's wealth and a third of the state's population also come from that same area as from Carolina as well. And the federal control of the sounds and canals into North Carolina means control of important towns in the area. towns like Edenton and New Bern, not to mention the 88 DQ locations throughout the state of North Carolina. Mary.
Wow, did you look that up to confirm?
I looked that up. I did.
That's great.
But yet, if you look at a map, you'll see the sounds and rivers creating a highway that allows anyone who controls them to travel the state via boat, basically at will, right? So to control the sounds of those vital waterways, you had to control an island that sat at the hub of them, and that is, of course, going to be called Roanoke Island.
Yep, and whoever controls that, as you said, is going to gain control of these waterways. And it also meant, too, that, if the Union can get control of it, the rebels likely aren't going to be able to take it back via an amphibious operation. So that's why. And again, this is why it's such an important piece to the puzzle of the Civil War, because it's a relatively small operation, but the effects it has that are going to be felt throughout the entire Civil War.
It's like Island number 10, but bigger ramifications. Yeah. It's kind of what it's like. Roanoke Island is bordered by 4 of those large sounds: Albemarle Sound to the north, Roanoke Sound to the east, Pamlico, as I mentioned, Sound to the south, and Croatan South to the west. And the idea of the Federals controlling that North Carolina Sounds, like you just said, was the state's worst nightmare, and first became a reality when the Federal troops captured the Hatteras Inlet on August 29th of 1861, and then Port Royal Sounds in South Carolina on November 7th, 1861. You may remember, Mary, we talked about Port Royal experiment last week. You've probably forgotten with Dr. Parton. But again, it's an important aspect to this, this drive. Yeah. And the problem was, though, despite the state of North Carolina knowing the attack on the Sounds was a huge hit right at the heart of the Confederacy, especially the prospect of the Union Navy setting up ports, Confederate President Jefferson Davis and the folks in Virginia didn't really understand the threat. They never really got it. No. When Hatteras Inlet fell to the Union in August of 61, it sent shockwaves to those in North Carolina. North Carolina's governor, a guy named Henry Clark, he wrote a letter begging Jefferson Davis for troops and materials to be sent to the Sounds. Davis, a former West Pointer and always felt he was the smartest guy in the room.
He did.
He didn't understand the threat. He didn't see it as much of an issue because in his mind, Virginia was still the key place to defend and where they needed to fight the Union Army. And it's funny, that rivalry between Virginia and North Carolina in the Civil War was real. It lasted throughout the war and for years later. Many Tar Heels, to this day, they'll say Virginia got all the credit and North Carolina did all the work.
Yep. Well, didn't North Carolina have an equal number or more troops in the war?
It depends on when. Like Gettysburg certainly did, and they probably did more work than Virginia. Speaking of that, but it's clear that Davis really didn't understand the importance of these sounds in its waterways and what mobility it would give the Union to move into the rest of Carolina as well as Virginia, like we said. But not every Virginian, Mary, felt this way. Believe it or not. A guy named Henry Wise. We'll talk about him a little bit later. The former governor of Virginia from 1856 to 1860, and the current commander of the District of Roanoke Island, saw how important strategically and how it was. After the war, when it was all said and done, Wise wrote, Roanoke Island should have been the Gibraltar of the South. That's how important it was. Henry Clark, the Carolina governor at the time, who had begged Davis for those troops and was turned down, he really responded with a really amazing Vinegar Valentine to Davis. So he writes, send us people, send us troops, and he gets turned down by Davis. I'm going to read you a quote of this letter, because it's just hilarious. Just pretend you're angry, like the letters you write to me. Okay.
What? Write you angry letters?
Here's what he says. Besides the arms we sent to Virginia in the hands of our volunteers, we have sent to Virginia 13,000 stands of arms, and we are now out of arms, and our soil is invaded, and you refuse our request to send us back some of our own regiments to defend ourselves? We have disarmed ourselves to arm you. The recent invasion, speaking of fall of Hatteras Inlet, compels us to buy a navy for our own protection, not receiving it from you, yet you also deny us powder? I mean, states' rights, I
Wow,
guess, right?
angry.
He was not a happy fellow, Mary. Not a happy at
Doesn't
all.
sound very happy at all.
But the bottom line is North Carolina was left holding its diaper in the rain, and they were SOL and JWF. They were, okay?
I wonder if someone's gonna have to explain that to their kid when they listen to this episode.
I apologize. Anyway. But I mean, you can imagine the urgency and the anger with the lack of support from Richmond.
Yep. I think it shows like how, and I think this happens on the federal side too, early in the Civil War, is there's such a disconnect between what is happening on the ground and what the administration, be it Davis or Lincoln, are seeing and how they're interpreting it. They're not as concerned as they need to be about certain things, and it's happening with Davis, but it's also happening with Lincoln as well. That stuff is like, well, I don't really need to worry about that kind of thing, and it's happening on both sides really in the Civil War.
It was, but again, they weren't completely ignored being Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean, Davis did dispatch a guy named Richard C. Gatlin. He was a North Carolina native from Kingston to command the Department of North Carolina the previous July. Now, Gatlin was a solid vet, West Point grad of 1832. He was Mexican War alum as well as the Seminole War, and he also participated in the Utah expedition with Albert Sidney Johnson in 1857. So this guy's been around the block a few times. But Gatlin was blamed, though, by Davis for that fall of Hatteras, and after he did move his headquarters to Goldsboro, North Carolina, in September of 1861, Gatlin begins to do his best to defend the area, including New Bern. But again, even after Governor Clark's Chuck U. Farley letter that he got, Davis still refused to send additional troops. But what he did was he sent some new subordinate generals to Gatlin to help organize his Department of North Carolina. Who did he send? He sent General Joseph R. Anderson, who had recruited a brigade of green troops, and he assigned to command the Cape Fear District. Fun fact, Joseph Anderson, you know what he did? He was the owner of the Tredegar Iron Works in Richmond.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there you go, right? The other general Gatlin got would be placed in charge of defending the actual sounds, and the general who would get that job is none other than Daniel Harvey Hill. D.H. Hill if you're nasty, right?
Oh, wow, I did like...
Well, we've talked a lot about D.H. Hill in other episodes, but really Hill is a really fascinating character in the war. We haven't drilled too much, but he was born in South Carolina, graduated 28th at 56 in the star-studded class of 1842, Mary, in West Point, joining classmates of none other than Albert Doubleday, Richard Anderson, John Pope, William Rosecrans, Earl Van Dorn, Gustavus Smith, the Rosewoods Clown, James Longstreet, and Lafayette McLaws. But what's interesting about that is not one of them graduated in the top three of the class.
No, and I'm just looking at a picture of D.H. Hill right now, and he just looks like I don't know what it is. If he just doesn't give a crap about what's going on. He's kind of like, whatever. Like, obviously our listeners can't see it, but he just, Google a picture of him. He just looks like he doesn't care.
He looks like the type of guy who would yell at a waitress.
He kind of does, actually. Yes. He looks like he would get really upset if he got, like, I don't know, home fries instead of toast or something.
I'd be mad at that too. But anyway, D.H. Hill left the Army after Mexico to teach mathematics, your old job, in Washington College.
That was Howard's job at West Point.
There you go.
There, I got Howard reference
So
in.
now it's Washington Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. He also taught at Davidson College in 1854. Now, here's the fun thing about D.H. Hill, okay? He hated himself some Yankees. And I don't mean the baseball team, Mary. I mean overall. While he was at Washington College, he did not like the textbooks that they were given. So he somehow, because they thought they were too biased towards the North, as textbooks tend to be.
Wow.
So he wrote his own math book, which showed his salty opinion. Now, I went.
How is math bias? It's like a science thing.
I don't know.
It's like,
well,
wow, that's a.
Let me tell you what I
reach.
did. I went and I found this book.
Yeah.
And I looked up some of the questions he asked them. This is real. This is honest to God. This is question I'm going to read you is an actual question from a book that D.H. Hill wrote for math. Okay? This is what I mean. A Connecticut Yankee goes to New York down to North Carolina with a dozen apples that he bought for 8 cents apiece, which he sells for 13 cents apiece. How much money did the Connecticut Yankee steal from the North Carolinian?
Oh my God.
That's an actual question.
So
Now, I'm not going to make you do the math because
what the?
But that was a question.
Seriously, that's what he.
That's a question from his math book. He had a whole bunch of these, but little salty fella
Whoa.
found a way to run.
So what did a Connecticut Yankee do to him?
I don't like the Connecticut either, though. Anyway, but Hill was a solid officer, but he also had a reputation of being reckless, also a little bit of a big mouth, also opinionated. We know some people. But in his career, he was seemingly everywhere. Seven Pines, South Mountain, the Sunken Road in Antietam, Chickamauga, Bentonville, etc. But when Hill arrived in North Carolina, he quickly discovered that Governor Clark's worries were right. He also learned that the key to the region was defending Roanoke Island at all costs. So what does he do? He's going to take about 2 weeks to inspect the defenses in the area throughout eastern North Carolina, including New Bern. Afterwards, he's going to write the Confederate Secretary of Defense, Judah Benjamin, got a big smile on his face in that picture, to warn him that the defenses in that area were worse than the Buffalo Bills. Okay? He wrote.
Yeah, but did they have refs going against them?
I don't know. Math book says things so anyway. But he's going to write now, Roanoke Island is the key to 1/3 of North Carolina, in whose occupation by the enemy would enable him to directly reach the Great Railroad from Richmond to New Orleans. 4 additional regiments are absolutely necessary for the protection of the island. That's what he writes, because he figures it out too, that the whole key to the whole thing is Roanoke.
Yeah.
He went on to say, they had low ammo, old and broken artillery, and they were dangerously low on black powder. He also requested 4 rifled cannon and listed each coastal city that would fall if Roanoke did. So this is getting serious now. So he's going to begin to basically build defenses on Roanoke Island, including an 80-foot-long earthworks near a place called Supple's Hill that ran west to east on a path leading north from Ashby Harbor. Okay. Now, these earthworks were anchored on both sides by what they considered impenetrable swamps on each flank.
Yeah, the swamps don't sound like they're like black and murky and slimy and gross.
Yeah, and so we'll talk more about those things a little bit later on. But then what does Hill do, though? He goes back to Richmond to meet with Jefferson Davis, where he is stunned to learn that his division now will be mind-numbingly cut in 2, drastically weakening the region. And this new southern district, based at Pamlico Sound, will be commanded by a North Carolina officer with 0.0 military experience named Lawrence O'Brien Branch. He's a former North Carolina congressman who wants to do some generaling, and they let him do it. Now, sidebar on Branch, by the way, real quick, he'll be killed later in the war in Antietam. He'll be having a conversation with Generals Maxcy Gregg, Dorsey Pender, and James Archer. While they're hanging out, a sharpshooter is going to shoot him through the right cheek. It's going to take the left side of his head off through his left ear. And the bullet's going to continue and hit Gregg in the thigh and wound him too. Wow. So it's quite a bullet, but he doesn't make it, but he's going to be here. Now this northern district now, which includes Roanoke Island, will be commanded by Henry Wise. Remember that former Virginia governor who I mentioned earlier. Well, Mary, there are problems. There are problems,
Shocker.
Right? There are problems in North Carolina. Okay, for whatever reason, Davis split the command structure, which will cause an incredible amount of confusion. So think about it. You finally got this thing under control. You think, you know what you're going to do. Yeah. Now, General Branch, the political general in the Southern District, will report directly to General Gatlin, okay, the Department of North Carolina commander. Now, Wise will report to Benjamin Huger, the commander of the Department of Norfolk. And some people accused of being somewhat senile, by the way, Mary. Huger, right? But Huger also, here's the thing. He doesn't recognize Roanoke Island's importance because why? He's focused on defending Norfolk. So instead of placing most of those resources at Roanoke, he's going to put them in Norfolk and Portsmouth. So, well, the bottom line is that because of these political appointments on the battlefield, the man ultimately put in charge of the defenses of Roanoke doesn't feel it's important at all and puts the guns elsewhere.
I just want to say this sounds oddly familiar with what is going on in the Western Theater at this point with Army of Tennessee, where you have Elbert E. Johnson. He's got that long front, but there's a bunch of people that are put at the top that are political appointees that probably should not have been there, and the ones that should have were lower positions. So I think this is kind of, I don't know, it's like maybe a pattern with the Confederates at this point early in the war.
No doubt. Well, what's Henry Wise going to do? He's going to learn of this, and he's going to beg Eugene to send him reinforcements to Roanoke, which, of course, he rejects because he wants them in Norfolk. Basically, Hughie can't spare a square, is what it comes down to, right? He doesn't want to give up any of the troops. Now, Wise is a political general with no military experience, and even he sees the potential disaster brewing. So you can kind of see where this one's going, right? One person, though, who does see the importance of defending Roanoke is the Confederacy's Secretary of the Navy, one Stephen Mallory, Mary. He'll personally send 242 cannon to North Carolina that are to be specifically used at Roanoke Island, New Bern, and Fort Macon only. That's what he says. So Wise, he'll get these guns and he'll be excited because now he can basically use them to complete the fortifications at Roanoke Island. Now, we'll talk real quickly about how it's set up. But they're going to set up 4 forts at Roanoke Island, all bordered by the 4 sounds surrounding the island. First one, Fort Bartow, which will be the island's primary fort at a place called Pork Point. Right? Good barbecue there, probably in North Carolina, Pork Point. Fort Bartow will have 9 32-pound smoothbore guns commanded by Benjamin Loyal, who by any chance he happens to be the brother-in-law of Union Navy Commander David Farragut.
Really?
It's a small world, Mary.
Interesting.
It's a small world. The second fort is Fort Blanchard, named for Gettysburg Foundation volunteer Mark Blanchard. No, it was actually named for General Albert Gallatin Blanchard. The third fort is Fort Eugene on the northern point of the island with 13 total guns. And the fourth one is Fort Forest that we'll talk about.
Which I asked you, is that named after Nathan Bedford?
No, it was not. It was not. But Wise also has 10 32-pounders that he's going to use to put behind hay bales and put them on other parts of the island so he can set up a crossfire. Wise does a real good job of setting this thing up. He also has 3,000 infantry at his disposal. 2 veteran regiments under his Wise Legion, the 46th and 49th Virginia, as well as some Green, North Carolina troops commanded by Colonel Henry Shaw, we'll talk about. This is the 8th and 31st North Carolina. He's also got 3 companies of the 17th North Carolina and the 2nd North Carolina Battalion. Henry Shaw is actually a doctor from Newport, Rhode Island, of all things.
Oh, he's a northerner.
He moved to Indiantown, North Carolina to begin his practice. Sounds like Claiborne a little bit, right?
Actually, it does, yeah.
The town is now called Shawboro in his honor. So there you go.
Claiborne didn't get a town named after him.
He did not. But here's the thing about Shaw. His troops are green, and they are glorified militia. They carried shotguns, hunting rifles. They wore stovetop hats. They had homemade uniforms, each one different than the other. And his artillerists used to be in the infantry. They got transferred. Not one had ever fired a cannon before. Yeah, this is, can't imagine why this one didn't go well.
Wow.
But Wise also has 7 gunboats from the Confederate North Carolina Squadron called the Mosquito Fleet.
Yep.
Under the command of Flag Officer William F. Lynch. Now, Lynch was high on energy and low on strategy, Mary. Put it that way, okay? But his claim to fame at that point was he was the guy who in 1849, he proved the Dead Sea was below sea level. That's his claim to fame in life, right? But for the most part, if the Union attacked, Wise had built a pretty good defense overall. He did. He did the best he could considering what he did.
He's doing a good job with what he has to work with, I think.
So what's the Union doing, Mary, right? So, while this back and forth is going on with the Confederacy in North Carolina, George McClellan, perhaps you've heard of him, Mary, he was formulating what will be eventually known as the Peninsula Campaign, and he knew that the strategic importance of those North Carolina sounds, because he knew basically how important it was. Now, he benefited from having experience from when he visited Crimea in 1855. Yeah. He was an observer during the Crimean War.
I'm merely an observer.
Just an observer. But there, along with Major Alfred Mordecai and Major Richard Delafield, he learned the importance of moving troops along a coastal region, also the importance of joint Army-Navy operations. If you're really, really bored, I mean really bored, you can read his Delafield Commission report, which kind of talks about what I learned overseas.
Yeah.
But it's important to gain an insight to his thinking when he replaced Winfield Scott as General-in-Chief of the U.S. Army on November 1st of 61. McClellan is going to use this experience in Crimea, and he's going to learn to cut the enemy in half, instead of supply bases on the coast, especially knowing that in this case, the Confederates had 3,000 miles of coastline to try to defend.
Yep.
So he learned something, and he's going to try to put it into practice.
Yep.
Okay. By November of 61, like we said before, the Federals had already held Hatteras Inlet and Port Royal Sound. And Mack also understood the importance of Roanoke Island, which sat just 40 miles north of Hatteras Inlet. Now, knowing his Peninsula campaign was being planned, and he was going to launch it the following March, McClellan felt that attacking the North Carolina Sounds with this joint Army-Navy effort that he discovered was necessary to create, I'm almost afraid to say this, Mary, a backdoor to Richmond.
Savannah?
Anyway. But he did, though. Now, this joint attack on the Navy side would be commanded by Flag Officer Lewis M. Goldsborough of the North Atlantic Blockading Squadron. Now, Goldsborough was a big fella.
I noticed from his picture.
From Washington, D.C., right? He was also the former superintendent of the Naval Academy in Annapolis, as well as a veteran of the Mexican War. Now, his fleet had 19 warships and 57 guns. Now, they were all handpicked because they could operate in the shallow sounds and rivers of North Carolina, which meant that they were fast and they could easily deal with what Lynch would have in his Mosquito fleet, or so they thought, right? So with McClellan's own plans on the horizon, he also made it clear that he's going to be attacking the peninsula. I can't spare any men either. So he tasked his old buddy, guess who?
Burnside.
Ambrose Burnside. To take care of it, okay? Basically, the history with those two is interesting. Burnside and McClellan attended West Point. They were one class apart.
Weren't they burning Mac?
They were burning Mac, right? After Mexico, Burnside resigned his commission and went into business for himself, having invented what?
Oh.
The Burnside carbine. Okay, we talked about it in the past. We have to take some quizzes here pretty soon. But his business failed primarily due to the fact that the U.S. government really didn't need to buy his carbines in peacetime, so it kind of went bankrupt.
Is this where the $3,000 would he?
No, that was
later.
owed
AP Hill.
Yeah. But step in George McClellan, who got him a job as the treasurer of the Illinois Central Railroad. And by that time, like you said, they were best friends, finishing each other's sentences, the whole deal, and they were Mac and Burn. But so McClellan now, he needs someone to command this Department of North Carolina, but also more importantly, to recruit troops for the assault on the Sounds. Because remember, he ain't giving up any. So he tells Burnside to go to New England and raise an army of fishermen, dock workers, anyone else with experience working in or around water for this joint assault on the North Carolina coast.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, that's really brilliant of him to get troops that, you know, he's looking for troops that are from New England and the mid-Atlantic states because they are going to have the experience of having been on the water already, possibly having been, you know, obviously in boats as well. And that's another interesting part of this campaign. Or this battle.
He does. Burnside is going to raise a 12,000-man army division from Mass, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, as well as personally purchasing 8 gunboats and 67 transport ships. McClellan must have paid pretty well back at the railroad, I think. But what he's going to do, he's going to take his division, split it into 3 brigades. And he wants his buddies to run these brigades for him. He's going to want people he knows, who he trusts. The people he's going to pick is John Foster, Jesse Reno, and John Park. And he also had the 1st New York Marine Artillery, commanded by William Howard, no relation, and the 99th New York Coast Guard under Charles Tillotson. So basically, Burnside had built a really strong division designed to attack a coast basically out of thin air. I mean, he really, really did. I mean, people rip on Burnside for different things, but you can't for this. I mean, this is good work by him.
But I think too, like, McClellan is probably helping him out with his own experience that he's had in the Crimea with that report he wrote too, right? Like he would be.
Oh yeah, probably
yeah.
as far as
But still,
as far as recruiting the people.
But
though.
yeah, it is really brilliant on Burnside's point.
So by January 5th, 1861, Burnside's troops are going to arrive at Hampton Roads, and they're going to hit there before heading to Annapolis to get supplies with plans to meet up with Louis Goldsborough, his navy at Hatteras Inlet. And it's while he's here in Annapolis, Burnside officially gets his orders from McClellan. Here's what the orders say, Mary. In cooperation with Flag Officer Goldsborough, you are to capture the sounds of North Carolina in the cities of New Bern, Edenton, and Elizabeth City, as well as capture Fort Macon and destroy the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad. And then he kind of loosens up. He says,
yeah.
And then he says, when you finish these objectives, you're free to attack Raleigh or Wilmington, whatever you want. Pick one. But he says, but it's clear the primary goals are the sounds, the canals, and the railroad. After that, have a party. Do whatever you want, So Burnside's army is going to leave Annapolis on those transport ships for Hatteras Inland when they get hit by a monstrous gale storm that's going to last from January 13th to the 15th.
It's a nor'easter that hits them, and it's horrible for them. They lose a few ships in it. One they lose called the Pocahontas, which had carried horses for the expedition. They also lost City of New York was a total loss with all her cargo, and the gunboat Zouave was lost as well, along with a few others. But those were kind of the significant losses of it. But they, to run into a nor'easter as you're going, but also to only lose, I think they lost maybe 5 or 6 ships in a nor'easter. That's pretty good out of what they start out with. They start out with 66 ships, and they only lose 6 of them.
They do. They lose a lot. Like you said, the city of New York, they lost all of its cargo. The gunboat Zouave disappeared completely, including the floating battery it was towing along. But the Pocahontas was sad because they lost 100 horses that drowned. And it made me think of the Doors song, Horse Latitudes. If you're cool, you can call that one, Mary. Obviously, you're not cool.
Nope,
You wouldn't know that
I'm
song.
not
But somebody
cool
listening to some of the
enough
Horse
for that.
that song. In any case, Burnside himself will be standing on the deck of his ship, the Picket, during the height of the storm, trying to inspire his men and calm them down. But again, this was a disaster for Burnside. But when the storm finally broke on the 15th, they're going to continue and finally get to Hatteras Island. When guess what happens? Another storm hits.
Yep.
This one's not as bad, but here's the thing, though. I mentioned before they picked these boats specifically to deal with the
shallow waters.
Yep. So what happens? They get to Hatteras Island. The depth at the sandbar was only 7 feet.
Yep.
All of his ships need at least 10 feet of water. Or most of his ships, anyway.
I was just thinking, this is one where we always talk about, communication, weather, terrain. This is one where the weather is going against them. But I'm also thinking, I'm like, it's January, February, and you're on the Atlantic Ocean. Like, I'm kind of like, why would you do it at this time? But I get it. Like, they're probably in a time crunch, and it's just like, well, let's just risk it and hope the weather doesn't happen,
Well, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, exactly.
But it led to a logistical nightmare transporting those supplies from the big ships to the smaller ones. They had to drag the big ones over the sandbar with the tugboat. It must have been miserable, right? It wasn't until February 5th when Burnside and Goldsborough finally arrive at Pamlico Sound, and their joint attack on Roanoke Island can be ready to begin. And so it happens very quickly as far as the battle goes. But the next morning, that Lynch's Confederate mosquito fleet, they're going to arrive as well. And they're going to be in the distance. And they're going to see this huge Union Navy, which is split in 2 at this point. One half to attack the forts on the island. The other half to attack the Navy, the mosquito fleet.
Yeah.
And there's a really cool story with this. A guy named Captain Charles C. Sims. He reported what he saw to Lynch, who started to feel the pucker effect of what he was seeing. And he realized his prospects were not very good. So Sims and Lynch, they both see the writing on the wall. And they're joined by a guy named Captain William H. Parker. And they're all huge fans of Walter Scott's book, Ivanhoe. And they spent a couple hours sitting around talking about the book. Just sitting around, just talking about this book. Parker then goes to leave, and he gets on his rowboat, and he turns to him. Parker was the captain of the CSS Beaufort. Parker says to Lynch, and this is a quote, "We can only hope for success, but what strangely constituted beings we are. looking forward to death in defeat, not victory, yet we are able to lose ourselves in the works of fiction.
Well, there is seriously nothing better than when you're in like a stressful situation. You talk about a book with
Yeah,
people.
that's one of the most surreal book club meetings of probably of all time.
Yeah,
right
that would
there.
be a very surreal book club meeting. It's like, well, what did you read today? Well, let's talk about this.
So the next morning is February 7th. At 9:30 in the morning, the Union assault in what will be known as the Battle of Roanoke Island will begin. Now, Goldsborough, he's going to tell his men he expects them to do their job, the whole deal. He's going to move his fleet up the Croatan Sound on the western shore of Roanoke Island towards the first rebel fort. This is Fort Bartow, and it's 9 guns. Goldsborough is also going to send the USS Underwriter under his name, I'm telling you, under Lieutenant W.N. Jeffers to a place called Ashby Harbor, which is 3 miles south of Fort Bartow, to clear a landing area for the infantry. Okay, the U.S. Underwriter is going to encounter Lynch's Mosquito fleet, but the Union guns' range is so much further, the rebel guns, the Mosquito fleet just start taking a beating. The USS Southfield, under Lieutenant C.F.W. Beam, joins and he fires a shell right through the hull of the Confederate CSS Curlew, a paddle wheel steamboat brought into the Confederate Navy in 1861. I'm going to tell you my favorite all-time Civil War story right now.
Okay.
It's this right here.
Okay, cool.
The CSS Curlew was commanded by a guy named Thomas T. Hunter, whose nickname was Tornado Hunter, because he had the reputation of being a complete lunatic. And here it is, okay? During the battle, and when the Curlew was hit and began to sink, for whatever reason, Hunter was on the deck wearing no pants. A true Porky Pig situation, okay? Later, after the battle, he survives. Hunter is going to tell another gunboat captain that he did not know what happened to his pants because he was pretty sure he thought he put them on that morning. So
I'm just picturing him as the Tasmanian devil right now.
the guy's on the boat pantsless during the battle, and then he tells his buddy later, I thought I had him.
How do you not, like...
I don't know. That's why it's a great story. But when the Curlew sinks, though, it did so in front of that rebel fort, Fort Forest. And what does it do? When it sinks, it doesn't go all the way under, so it blocks the guns of the fort, making that fort completely useless in the battle. He just blocked it. It's like a car breaking down on the rotary. Just can't move and screws the whole thing up,
worse.
right? The Union gunboats continued up Croatan Sound, targeting Fort Bartow, but they'll continue to take hits from that rebel batteries. The USS Commodore Perry was hit 8 times, as was the U.S. Hunchback from Benjamin Loyal's 9-gun battery at Fort Bartow.
Also, Commodore Perry is a great beer from Great Lakes Brewery.
Oh, yeah. But the Rebs ended up tagging about 27 hits on the Union fleet, so they're doing pretty good, okay? Another cool story came from the USS Valley City, commanded by Lieutenant S.C. Chaplin, which was hit by a shell that crashed and exploded near the ship's powder magazine room. A gunner named John Davis, he calmly sat in a powder barrel and put out the fire before the flames could ignite the powder in the powder room. But again, different breed. But for the most part, Fort Bartow held its own against the Union gunboats. But while the eyes of the Confederates were focused on Bartow, the Union infantry boats started to land safely at Ashley Harbor, south of the fort. So the harbor now, this harbor was defended originally by just one regiment, the 31st North Carolina, under Colonel John Vaughn Jordan, a pharmacist from New Bern who quit West Point to be a pharmacist. Just quit.
Wow.
Jordan's regiment was made up of only 20 sharpshooters and 2 cannon. That's all he had. So when Jordan spotted the Union infantry landing at Ashby Harbor, he told his men, do not fire on the men disembarking from the transport ships until I tell you. Okay, fine. But what happens? While hiding in the woods waiting for the order to start firing, the glitter from their rifles gets spotted by Stephen Rowan, the division commander who was aboard the USS Delaware.
Glitter?
Glitters in the sun, right?
Glitter.
Okay.
I don't know what I was picturing with that, but glitter, woo.
But Rowan orders the guns to fire in the woods, scattering Jordan's 31st North Carolina like birds, basically. They never got a chance to fire a single shot, and they retreated back to their redoubt out of those newly built breastworks along Supple Hill. So by midnight now, there's 10,000 Union troops on shore. So the next morning on February 8th, the Union infantry is going to begin to move north up the island on its only road.
Yep, and that's around 7:30 in the morning, right?
Yep, they get rolling pretty quickly. In the lead is Colonel Edwin Upton's 25th Massachusetts and John Foster's 1st Brigade. They're going to be the first to approach that rebel redoubt, which is manned by just 400 rebel infantry, as well as 1,000 more in reserve about 250 yards behind. And the reason why it was set up that way is because the road, it was thin. You couldn't get that many people in there. So don't forget, though, this redoubt was flanked on both sides by swamps that the Rebs considered impenetrable. So they didn't really bother to protect either flank. This Henry Wise, this is where he screws up. He doesn't guard the flanks.
Yeah, they think that the swamps are just so disgusting that they're like, that'll protect us. And it's like, nope.
So when the battle starts, Henry Wise, he gets sick. He gets a lung issue. Some say pneumonia, some say a pleurisy. But he had to turn over command to a guy, to Henry Shaw we talked about, that doctor turned colonel. And he's about to see battle firsthand. And again, he's green too. The Union troops are going to spread out on both sides and fire at each other for over 2 hours. Going to stare at each other, until the 25th Mass runs out of ammo and was relieved by the 10th Connecticut. And there was basically a stalemate. The Union couldn't get through, that they couldn't break through. Charles Russell, he commanded the 10th Connecticut. And like the Massachusetts men, they couldn't break the rebel line either at that redoubt. And that stalemate just continued and continued. But soon that 2nd Brigade under Jesse Reno, he arrived and told his men, the 51st New York, the 21st Mass, and the 9th New Jersey, to go to the left, enter that swamp, and hit the flank on the rebel right. Go get yourself dirty.
Yep.
Basically what he told them. Foster is going to order two of his 1st Brigade regiments, the 27th and 23rd Mass, to go to the right.
Should have gone to the right.
Should have gone to the right. To enter the swamp on the right and hit the flank on the rebel left. So that's going to be like a pincer, right?
Yep.
Reno and Foster's men had no problem getting through the, quote, impenetrable swamp. Okay,
I was going to say, like, those guys were like bank. They're like, they're not going to make it through the swamp. It's like, holy shit, they did.
But they hit each rebel flank almost simultaneously.
Yep.
Both flanks begin to roll up like a blanket. Now, with the flanks in disarray, Foster now is going to order a frontal attack with the 24th Mass under Thomas Stevenson, along with remnants of the 10th Connecticut and that 25th Mass who fought a little bit earlier. So the whole thing is falling apart like a house of cards for Shaw. So with the rebel line collapsing, Colonel Henry Shaw is going to issue Special Order GTFO.
Yep.
And its entire brigade is going to take off to the north, right? They're going to run. Now, the problem with this, there's a problem with retreating on an island. You know what it is?
You can't go anywhere.
Eventually you
run into water. You need a boat.
When Shaw realized the Union gunboats had destroyed much of the rebel artillery, and since he was on an island and had nowhere to run, he decided he had no choice but to surrender. And when I say surrender, I mean everything.
Yep.
His entire 2,500-man brigade, all of his 30 remaining artillery, and all 4 forts. Just, here you go. Right this way. Take it all. And towards the end of the battle, reinforcements that he had kept back from the 2nd North Carolina and 46th Virginia, they show up just in time.
And the Union's celebrating by that point, and they're like, well, F this. Like,
they came to help, and they literally walked into a surrender, and they said, all right, here we go, we surrender. So they got there just in time to surrender. So, but going back on the water, though, up Croatan Sound, William Lynch sees his Mosquito fleet has no chance against Goldsborough's navy. He's going to pull back to the Possatonk River, which is northwest of Roanoke Island. He'll try to set up a defense, and Goldsborough now, he's going to smell blood. And he wanted to destroy the entire fleet, so he chased him for a few days. So now we're on February 10th, and the Union Navy is going to slowly sail up the Possatonk River. Now, Lynch has 6 ships remaining, and he has them parked at a place called Cobb's Point. And even though they were low on ammo, like 7 shots per ship left, he's hoping to mask their fire on the approaching Union fleet. Might as well, right?
Yep.
Stephen Rowan, the guy who saw the glitter in the woods.
The glitter.
He's an Irishman from,
Glitter bomb.
from Dublin, by the way. Dublin, Ireland.
Really?
Right from the source, you know? He's commanding the Union attack fleet, but he decides not to fire on them at Cobb's Point because you know why? He's kind of low on ammo too.
Yep.
But he pulls out his YOLO card and he orders the USS Commodore Perry to ram into the CSS Seabird, literally cutting it in two. The USS Ceres approached the CSS Ellis and didn't shoot on it. What do they do? Using grappling hooks, they boarded the rebel ship, pirate style, and men literally fought with cutlasses on the deck with Pirates of the Caribbean theme song in the background.
That's awesome. That's what I was just thinking.
So that's what
awesome.
you have the men fighting with sabers on a exactly
Yo-ho, a pirate's life for
right.
me.
The CSS Beaufort under Captain Parker, the Ivanhoe Book Club guy, he took off upriver towards a place called the Dismal Swamp Canal, and was followed by the CSS Appomattox. But the thing was funny about it is they could not get away because the Appomattox was literally 2 inches too wide to get to the canal.
Okay. But the Dismal Swamp name was what got me when I was doing my research. I was like, holy, what is this place? This sounds like a place from Supernatural.
Imagine being the prom queen from Dismal Swamp Canal.
That's worse than being the prom queen from Rough and Ready.
Rough and Ready, you go. So what they do, the Appomattox, eventually they sink it because they want to block the canal from Union ships. So basically, by the end of February 10th, 1861, this Union Joint Army-Navy force had captured Roanoke Island, most of northeast North Carolina, and had blocked the Albemarle Chesapeake Canal. So what happens? The Union gunboats and transports now have full access to all these rivers, all these canals that the Rebs desperately needed to protect, and soon the towns of Edenton, Williamston, they're all under federal control.
Yep.
The one objective Burnside and Goldsborough could not complete was that they did not go that far enough to seize the railroad. But by controlling North Carolina sounds is going to be just as important. Now you control those sounds. The Union is now able to cut off Norfolk because their food supply comes from the sounds. So within months, on May 10th, 1862, what's going to happen? Norfolk's going to surrender without a shot.
Yep.
And this all goes back to Roanoke. So this was an absolute epic disaster for the Confederates, and one that could have ended very differently if Jefferson Davis and the powers that be had heeded Henry Wise's and D.H. Hill's warnings.
Yeah, it's still a very low casualty battle on both sides, though. Like the Union, 37 killed, 214 wounded, and 13 missing. Confederate losses, very, very similar. But there's the Confederates also have 2,500 Confederate soldiers that surrender. So there is that.
Can you imagine going into a battle in enemy territory with 10,000 men and losing 300? I mean, that's a hammer and nail slam dunk right there.
Yeah, but as you said, like, you know, if Jefferson Davis had heeded what they were saying, it might have been different. But he didn't.
And then Benjamin Huger, his decision not to send reinforcements to Wise is going to come back and haunt him badly.
Yeah.
Now, on the Union side, Ambrose Burnside, his reputation soared like a rocket ship to the moon after this one.
Yeah. I wonder if this is why, and I'm sure it is, that you see him put in command after Antietam, when McClellan gets fired, basically, that he's put in command.
It's tough to say, though, because, you know, he ends up in the Ninth Corps, and, you know, Jesse Reno gets killed over at the South Mountain.
Yeah.
But even in Antietam, in charge of the Ninth Corps, Jacob Cox is kind of running it with him, so he doesn't really get he gets the blame from McClellan for not crossing the bridge fast enough, but he doesn't get all the. Yeah. So it's a weird thing. His reputation.
Yeah, I mean, I think Burnside is one of those guys that, I mean, he does well at Knoxville as well. Like he does pretty good there. But I think Burnside is one of those guys that he's just like, when he's like in command of a whole army, it's just not, it's not his thing. But again, a lot, I mean, we won't go into this, but just, you know, there's a lot going against him at Fredericksburg as well. Like,
and after the battle, it's a disaster. And now Virginia's realizing what the hell just happened here. So what does Jefferson Davis do? He blames Henry Wise.
course.
Henry
'Cause why
Wise.
not?
Henry Wise goes, "No, you didn't."
Why not?
Right? He pushes back hard as he should have. What should have ended up with he ends up leaving, going to the Army of Northern Virginia. He ends up with Lee's one of Lee's subordinates, and don't forget, he's one of the guys at Appomattox who was urging Lee to surrender. This is Henry Wise.
Interesting that Appomattox, the boat, was at the battle.
Not the Hunchback or the Seabird.
The Appomattox.
You know, but Wise, I mean, after the war, he never got over Roanoke Island for two reasons. One, he wrote, and this is a letter he wrote, the loss at Roanoke Island was a disaster in command, in leadership of the government, and a disaster for the future control of North Carolina and Norfolk. But the main reason why he was so upset was his son Obadiah was killed at this battle. Oof. And it literally added a cruel insult to injury for Henry Wise.
Yeah.
This is a guy who was a Virginian, who was one of the few who saw the importance of the North Carolina Sounds. He begged for help, along with the governor from North Carolina. He does get D.H. Hill to come down, who agrees with everything he says.
Yeah.
And politics in Richmond screwed this whole thing up.
Yep.
Because Eugene never should have had control of Roanoke Island, and the whole thing was a mess. Throw in the fact that Henry Wise gets sick. Shaw has to take over, no experience, gets pantsed hard. And you can see the impact this has, because at this point, the Union's going to control North Carolina, and the ramifications for the rest of the war are huge.
Yep, I agree. This has huge ramifications, and it's something that doesn't get studied enough. And again, from what I said earlier, with Davis not listening and all that, but also you see the same thing on the Union side as well. There's a lot going on both sides where they're not really listening. They don't understand. Lincoln and Davis don't understand the full military situation that's going on, and they are both making mistakes along the way. You know, Lincoln does appoint some political generals Franz Sigel, that don't exactly work out. But, you know, very similar to what's happening with the Confederates at Roanoke, you have a similar command thing happening, as I said earlier, with Army of Tennessee, with political appointees that Davis is friends with are getting those higher appointments, and Albert Sidney Johnston is having to deal with that in the Western Theater. So this is kind of like, it's a pattern with Davis, but as I said, there are similar things happening on the Union side as well with Abraham Lincoln too, that they're just trying to find their way through the Civil War, which is in its very early days. But I would encourage any of our listeners to look more at Roanoke Island. It's a small battle when you're comparing it to something like Gettysburg or Chickamauga, but the effect it has goes on throughout the whole Civil War.
Yeah, they didn't realize how important, this is the Confederates in Richmond, they didn't realize how important it was, Judah Benjamin, Jefferson Davis, etc., until after it was gone. You don't appreciate what you'll have until it's gone, right? Someone's saying that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the Confederates lost North Carolina Sounds, Henry Wise lost his reputation, and most importantly, Thomas Hunter lost his pants.
Yep. That is such a great story.
And we'll never
such
know.
A good story.
We'll never
such a good
know.
story.
So again, it's an important battle to study. So go ahead and research this one, because I know if you're from North Carolina, then you understand the importance of Roanoke Island, or because the long-term effects it has.
Or as I used to call it, Roanoke.
I'm sure, of course you did.
I did.
But again, because it leads to so many things that came later on. Fort Fisher, so many things.
Yeah.
Obviously, Norfolk. It all because of the work that Burnside put in for his 12,000-man, really green regiment from the Northeast.
Yeah.
Being able to do this with Goldsboro and his guns. But really it comes down to the fact that the Confederates was a day late and a dollar short. They didn't have enough men to defend it because Richmond did not take it seriously. It was only when it fell when they realized, oh crap, what the hell just happened there? And they were chasing their tail the entire time.
Yep.
So that's Roanoke, and I think it's an important battle to study. So check it out, and I think if you do, you'll appreciate it, because it's got like many of these battles, they got a lot of cool stories, and the small things affect the big picture. In this one, of all the battles we've done, the Battle of Roanoke Island probably has the biggest long-term effects from what we consider a small battle than pretty much any of them.
And that's why, again, it's so important to not just, everybody can have their favorite battle. I obviously do with Chickamauga. Darren does with Gettysburg, and we love a lot of other battles too. But that's why it's so important to study the whole war, because you see how they all feed in one into the other and all that. And it's this big jigsaw puzzle that is the Civil War, and to put it all together to figure it out. And even then it's still tough to figure it out. You need to study the whole war and not just, just one single battle.
There we go. So going to Carolina in my mind, Mary. That's what we did today.
Wait, isn't it Georgia on my mind?
No. God. Not a James Taylor fan, apparently. In any case.
No,
all right.
I am.
So what's coming up for us next, Mary?
So next we are going to be sitting down to talk about what episodes to do.
Oh, that'll be thrilling. That'll be exciting. But then, in any case, we have some fun stuff going.
We have some stuff planned. We just had our round table last night. It was a lot of fun. So we're going to be doing another one. Hopefully we'll do another one in February.
Oh, we'll definitely do one in February.
Yeah, we will do one in February. And those are, if you want to attend the roundtable, it's Civil War Breakfast Club at gmail.com. Send us an email and we will add you to our list to send out invites to. We just do them via Zoom. Very casual Civil War discussion. All opinions, all sides are welcome and all that. So we had a really, really good time last night with everybody. So thank you to those listening who were on there with us. It was really awesome.
It definitely was. So we'll jump off. Mary, any final words from you, Finchero?
No, thank you for bringing it like you always do.
Likewise. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that introduction. It was so creative.
I try.
My Lord working on that. So
try.
Anyway, everybody have a great rest of the weekend when this drops. It'll be Friday. The weekend will be here. So hopefully the weather is warming up where you are. Hopefully you have a safe weekend. And we will talk to you all on the other side.
See y'all later.
Peace out.
Bye.